When I was younger, I participated in the Cub Scouts organization. Never made it to the Eagle Scout status or anything, but I have a lot of fond memories of my time with the Scouts. Pinewood Derby races, camping trips, learning first aid tricks. It was all really fun and taught me some important lessons. Funny then how one of the scariest moments of my life came from one of these scouting events. I was taught very early on in life about the basic idea of stranger danger. The same thing every kid gets taught. I was just unaware that not everything is what it seems sometimes. The time was rolling around once again for another camping trip for the Scouts. We had different sites we would tend to visit, and usually you would be split up throughout the camp based on your troop level. It was always an exciting time. My parents were troop leaders, so I always got to see the behind-the-scenes setup for the trip. Even though I wasn't very old at the time, I got to help load camping equipment, see what the camp events list was going to be, and plan out with my friends all the things we were wanting to do while we were there. The trip was planned, and everyone set out to meet up at the camping grounds. The trip started as they all did. Everyone got their tents set up, there was a spirit rally after dinner, and the troops were given their free time in the evening to do whatever they had planned before bed. It was a 2-night trip, and the first day and night went about as anyone would have expected it to. And day 2 of the trip rolled around. And I remember walking around the forest and hiding flags for a scavenger hunt competition we would usually have. Troops would hide flags for other troops, and it would be a race to see who could complete each other's hunt first. I was doing my best to find spots I thought would really give the rival troop a run for their money, which meant I ended up being a little off the main path towards the end of my flag hiding. I only had one flag left to hide when I ran into a troop leader. Not one that I recognized, but he had the right clothes, medals, and paraphernalia. He asked me what I was doing so far away from the main campsite. I apologized and said I was just trying to find good hiding spots for the scavenger hunt. He told me it was okay and to not worry with a wink. He wouldn't tell the other troop leaders. That was a bit odd. He had a disheveled look to him, although for the most part he looked exactly like any other scout leader. He told me to run along back to camp, and that he was getting a group together of a bunch of different scouts to help collect wood for the bonfire, and if I was interested, he would send one of the other scouts to come get me later that evening. I loved the bonfire, so I said I was happy to help. He gave me a slightly eerie grin and sent me off. The day progressed, and I eagerly awaited to be told it was time to collect the firewood. Night started to settle in at this point, and eventually another scout found me in the camp and said his troop leader was ready and that he had gotten the other scouts together already and that I needed to follow him right away. I didn't recognize this boy either, but he was wearing a scout uniform with a troop number, so I started following him. We walked for a while without coming across any other scouts, and I started getting uncomfortable, asking where the troop leader was. The boy was silent. We hadn't even collected any wood on our walk. I was about ready to head back at this point, when the other boy suddenly sprinted off into the woods. I yelled for him to wait, but when I shined my flashlight towards the direction he ran, I caught the sight of that troop leader hiding behind a tree, except not in leader clothes anymore, just raggedy clothes, smiling at me. He started to run towards me, and I screamed and did my best to run back to camp. Other leaders heard my yelling and met me halfway. I told them about the man and the boy, and they told me there wasn't a wood collecting trip happening, and that I needed to follow them back to camp immediately. I went back with them, and they messaged the local wilderness guard about the man. I was admittedly quite scared the rest of that trip. My parents didn't let me wander off anymore. And looking back, I'm pretty sure that man had put an outfit together to lure kids into the forest for who knows what reason, and that he had a kid, maybe his own, helping him to make it seem more legit. I knew not to talk to strangers, but I honestly thought that that man was a leader and that I could trust him. I can imagine the worst if he had actually caught me that night, and I started being far more careful and skeptical about people I didn't know from then on. This story is probably the closest I've ever come to dying in my life. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but I'm being entirely serious, and this series of events still haunts me to this day when I think about it. Not too long ago, I'd been going through the motions of a regular day. I went to work, cooked dinner, sat around, the usual, when I remember getting a text from my dad saying that my grandparents had sealed the deal on a new house and that since I owned a pretty hefty-sized truck, I should come help them move out some of their stuff so that they didn't have to pay a moving company. My grandparents lived out in rural Tennessee. It wasn't the longest drive in the world away from me, but it was long enough that I would have to take off time from work to spend the day getting there and then another day to move their stuff and get back. I wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea, but my grandparents required help, and so I took off the time and planned the trip. I left in the early afternoon with plans to get there a bit later in the evening, spend the night at their place, and move the stuff in the morning. I packed the little clothes and toiletries I would need and started making my way over. The drive was pretty relaxing. The scenery started turning to nothing but open fields and meadows as I started entering the more rural part of the state. I was starting to get low on gas, though, and stations out here start to become few and far between. So, I figured I would go ahead and hit the next station, top off my tank, and so that way I didn't have to worry about it after the truck was loaded and we started the moving process. It took a good few minutes for another station to come up. The sun was starting to dip, and I was right on schedule. I pulled into one of the only 2 pumps that the station had, and went in to give the clerk money for the pump. It was a small little store. Nothing outstanding about it. I grabbed a snack and went to the counter to pay when the clerk asked, "So, what's got you coming around this way, friend?" "Oh, my grandparents live a bit farther down the way. They needed help moving with my truck and I just needed to make sure I had gas first, you know?" "That's smart. Not too many stations around. I'm assuming your family's down the way off Anderson, right?" I hesitated for a second. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He told me that it was just a popular neighborhood for visitors to be coming and going from. I paid for the gas and snack and went on my way. The whole conversation, I kept getting a really weird vibe from the guy. Not the hospitality I would expect, but an odd air about him. I paid it no mind, filled up my truck, and continued on down the road. Night was coming up, and I knew I was getting close. I turned off the road to start making my way towards the final road that would take me to my grandparents. When I started hearing screams for help, I slammed my brakes as a guy came out of the meadow next to me. He was holding his head, and I could clearly see plenty of blood. I got out and asked if he was okay. He said that there had been an accident and that he needed help at his farmhouse down the way. I figured this was serious from the look of the man, and I had him hop in my truck and give me directions to his house. He directed me down the way and then off onto a side road that led deeper into the meadow. Eventually I could see a small house off to the side, and he said we could stop here. I got out and followed him as he rushed towards the place. But I slowed down, though, when I saw a few things that caught my eye. I said he should go ahead, and that I was going to run back to my truck to grab a first aid kit real quick. The man seemed angry, and started yelling at me to come back and that he needed me now. I got back into my truck and slammed on the gas, peeling out of there. The first thing I noticed when we were running up to the house was that there was no actual wound on the man's head where his hand had been holding. And as we got closer to the house, the littlest bit of ambient light given off by my truck barely showed the silhouettes of some men who were hiding off to the side, crouching down next to the house in the darkness. I made the choice then to make an excuse to get back to my truck and get out of there. I'm pretty sure that was an attempt by those men to murder me and steal my truck and belongings. I'm beyond thankful I caught the clues when I did. I don't want to say that the gas station clerk had helped set the plan up, but between the vibe I got and him asking me where I was going in a very specific way, I wouldn't be surprised. I completed the move, and I haven't stopped for someone on the side of the road since. I probably will in the future, but I'm paying much more attention now. A few friends of mine and I have been planning a trip to my buddy's lake house for quite a while. Spring semester was coming to a close, and we were all looking forward to kicking off the summer. It took some serious convincing, but my friend's parents finally allowed him to take us over to their lake house for the weekends. With finals done, you can imagine we were quite ready for the trip. It was a decent drive out, but the road trip getting there was part of the fun. We had packed up all of our stuff, made a plan to meet at our friend's place, and all grouped up into his van to start heading that way. We went on with all the normal conversations we would get into, making up games to pass the time, and talking about all the things we were wanting to do while we were there. Some of us passed out in the car, but eventually we pulled up to the place. It was a real nice spot. 2 stories, but not the most square footage. Great view of the lake with a porch and balcony. I was admittedly pretty jealous. My friend told us that it's not uncommon for other people to be around at their houses across the lake at this time of the year, but it should be relatively quiet, and most of this side of the lake should be all ours. We mad dashed into the house trying to claim the best bunks. I managed to grab one of the beds next to the balcony, and I rubbed it in a little. After getting settled, we ate a quick lunch and made our first trip out onto the lake. We ran through the usual, wakeboarding, swimming, and whatnot. While out on the lake, I couldn't help but notice, though, that there was a man a bit off in the distance who seemed to have been watching us for quite some time. Like, an uncomfortable amount of time. I brought it up with my friend, and he said it was no big deal. Everyone watches everyone when people come hit up the lake. That was fine enough for me, I guess, but not the most reassuring answer I wanted to receive. We continued doing everything we wanted to do as the day went on. No matter what we did, though, after being in the lake, I never shook the feeling of being watched, even though I never saw the man again, and not a single one of my other friends seemed to notice or even care, really. I even got made fun of at one point for being overly paranoid, and that if I wasn't careful, Jason would spring up out of the lake and get me. How hilarious. Evening came, and we started grilling and getting the campfire going. I managed to finally find some peace as the sun dipped below the tree line, the air filled with the smell of burgers, and the fire crackled on. I asked my friend if he knew how many other lake houses there were around. He said he didn't quite know for sure, but it was at least in the double digits. But for the most part, they were spaced out enough to give some privacy. He said he rarely ever saw anyone else when he wasn't out on the lake. We ate, drank a bunch, and told stories about our plans of what we would do after college. Eventually, the night came to a close, and we all very fuzzily found our way back to our bunks. I was in bed, having a hard time getting comfortable in the bunk, when I remember falling asleep for some period of time, but waking back up to the feel of a breeze that was on me. I was finally too comfortable to move, but with my eyes slightly open, I could see that the balcony window was open, and there was just enough moonlight coming in that I could see what looked like the top of a head looking in at me from behind the curtain. The person was still. I could just see the top of a head and eyes staring me down, unmoving. I tried as hard as I could not to panic and to pretend I was still asleep, but I couldn't hold it in. As the curtain started looking like it was moving my direction, I panicked, screaming for everyone to get up as I pushed out of my bed and into the hallway as quickly as I could. I could hear the groggy sounds of my friends trying to throw themselves out of bed, accompanied by the very loud sound of someone running across the balcony and climbing down. My friend who owned the place grabbed his gun and ran out to look for whoever it was. But whoever it was long gone into the woods. I told everyone what I saw, fighting back some tears of fear. I couldn't see enough of the person to say whether or not it was the person that I had seen watching us earlier. But out of safety, we all packed up and slept together downstairs for the rest of the night, just to be sure, and left in the morning, calling the trip short. It took a long while before I went back to that lake house. They never had another incident like that. Maybe whoever it was felt like it was easier to go after a few younger guys. Whatever the reason was, I still have nightmares about it, and I can't sleep around long curtains anymore.